Joining us from Texas to discuss the latest on these strikes in the Middle East is former Congressman Ron Paul, is the host of the Ron Paul Liberty Report and a former U.S. presidential candidate. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be with you. Let's
take a look at the Middle East right now. The United States has just sent hundreds of Marines into northern Syria. It in fact conducted more airstrikes in Yemen in the past month than it has in the whole of last year. And it's also part of this war to retake the city of Mosul in Iraq from ISIL militants. And if we look at this, after several years of withdrawals, drawdowns as they've been called, are we seeing the United States return to the Middle East as a major force now?
Well, we never really left, and the philosophy has been the same, Republicans and Democrats, that we have this necessity to be involved there. But yes, it's been accelerated since the new administration came in. I think it's very dangerous. I think that even though there were some of us that had hoped that the policy would change in having an outreach to Russia and talking about, well, we don't want to be a nation building. At the same time, they're dropping more bombs and intimidation, say we'll go any place, anywhere, because we have to defeat ISIS. Well, ISIS happens to, I think, be more of a philosophical position, and they're antagonized and motivated sometimes just by, the strong rhetoric. Matter of fact, there was no ISIS in Syria before we got involved there a few years ago. So there are a lot of unintended consequences, a lot of blowback that comes from a policy that doesn't have strict rules on itself, that we as a nation should deal with any true threat to us, and rather than getting involved so carelessly and saying, oh, it's for national security, and they have no point. It's, to me, I'm unhappy that our country will talk about national security and protecting our Constitution and our liberties, and I see that so often the ramifications of what we do is a detriment to our personal liberties here at home. We lose our privacy, and of course, financially, it's a great burden, and I think this is going to quit when our country goes bankrupt, and we're insolvent right now, and that's how the Soviets came down, because by economic mistakes, and I think we're making some of them, especially related to our foreign expenditures.
What do you make of the fact that when we look at this, what has been called the expanding military footprint of the United States in the Middle East, that there has been very little public debate about this? It seems to have been done almost in stealth.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case, and that's what my program, the Ron Paul Liberty Report, deals with all the time, trying to awaken the people. Because I think there's a natural tendency, whether it's the people of China, Japan, Korea, or Russia, or Germany, or any place, I think most people who have to pay all the prices are inclined to peace. And yeah, they're talked into the war, but they have to have an enemy, and they have to be very fearful of what might happen. So the propagandists, political propagandists, and I don't say I can criticize my own government, but it's true pretty much with all governments. And when they have to get the people not to agree with going to war, but they have to get the support. So generally that is the case, to scare the people and get them ready. But when I deal with my own foreign policy in this country, and I used to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee and tried desperately to stop our invasion of Iraq, claiming it would lead to a disaster. But the people, I don't think the people really want this. And I don't think the people who promote the agenda and all the neocons that have so much control in our country, I don't think they would ever say, like when they get together, they say, yeah, we got to get this war going. They think they're going to run the world just by threat and innuendo and have their way, and there'll be no unintended consequences. And yet there are unintended consequences, and the most important one for all of us throughout the world will be the economic unintended consequences, because fortunately most people can't afford the wars that are constant, because it drains wealth from the people, and the people should recognize that. That's why I talk about economics all the time, because when you spend a lot of money on the military, you take a country like North Korea, they don't even have lights at night because most of their GDP is in military. So I'd much rather export ideas, buy free free markets and personal liberty could solve all these problems if we would just commit ourselves to non-aggression. We as a nation and we as a people should never use aggression against each other. We should be talking to people instead of threatening and thinking that if you just threaten people, they'll do our bidding and we'll have our way. I think that's the wrong approach.
And if we look at the victims on the ground, we've been getting these reports over the past few days that U.S. airstrikes on Mosul in Iraq may have resulted in the deaths of civilians. The U.S. is carrying out an investigation right now into whether they were responsible for those deaths. But when we look at something like that, aren't they counterproductive? Don't they create more anti-Americanism and actually act as a recruitment tool for groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda?
Well, I think absolutely, and if people recall, when I was in the presidential debates, I tried to make that point, and even with our 9/11, I indicated, because I listened to the people who were participating in that and said, we're madder than the devil at the Americans because of your constant bombing of Iraq, not defending the Palestinians ever, and putting military troops on the Holy Land in Saudi Arabia. And I believe that had a lot to do with it. And then the CIA knew about it, and they called that blowback, that you have consequences when you initiate some form of aggression against other nations, even if you do it economically. If you're always putting on sanctions of people, I think it can lead to a real challenge to the dollar supremacy.
If we look at United States intentions and the future, we look at the budget proposal that has been tabled by the White House, and we see that of all the government departments in the United States, the Pentagon will get the biggest increase. I think in real terms, it works out to something like $56 billion over the next year. Does the Pentagon need more money, and can the United States afford to keep pouring money into this military machine?
No, it's a major source of our economic problems. I think there's two problems that are destroying our budget and bringing us to our knees, economically speaking. One will be the foreign expenditures in the constant war, but the other will be the endorsement of welfareism, rather than emphasizing liberty and free markets and having healthy economies. But the two together are devastating to our economy, and this administration, so-called conservative administration, they're supposed to be for less spending, but our deficits are destined to explode because we're spending they've told us they're going to spend a lot more money on the military. They're going to build a lot more nuclear bombs, and they're going to, redo all the highways. And there's not going to be any backing away from welfareism, which teaches dependency. And it may not be socialism, but it has some of the ill effects of socialism, because people become dependent and figure, oh, the government will take care of me, and I don't have to worry about it. So I think that is a story that will lead us to a bankruptcy and the rejection of the dollar, and that will be a much more significant event even than all this militarism that I'm trying to curtail.
And if we, just one final question on the military deployments in the Middle East. If we look at what the United States is doing there in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen as well, is this an attempt by the United States to help its allies in the region against what is seen as growing Iranian influence?
Well, yeah, it's to help allies, but I don't know why we should. And one announcement we had this week is there will be less announcements. At least the presidents in the past have felt a bit of compulsion to at least tell the American people that we're going to send 500 troops here or 5,000 here or there. Even though they defied our law of declaration of war, they would at least let us know. But now it's an announcement, we're not going to tell you exactly where the troops are going. And I've complained, as many Americans have complained, especially the libertarians, that one of our biggest flaws has been going to war without a constitutional approach of declaring a war and knowing who the enemy is and knowing, what we have to do to win the war. So no, we just go to war and we put the troops in. And once again, like we just talked about, this can lead to a lot of antagonism. The Japanese right now are sort of getting tired of our troops being there. World War II's been over for a while, and the Philippines, they're unhappy with us being there. But the special interests are glad for us to alleviate some of the expenditures in Europe. And I think Trump makes a good point. Maybe they ought to all pay their share, but I don't. I think the best way to get them to pay their fair share is for us to just let them take care of their own defense, rather than us provoking it and pretending that we can create perpetual peace in Europe or Asia by us wheeling and dealing with our military force and trying to get people to do exactly as we want.
Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.